Ever get that feeling? You know that feeling?
Yeah.
Like you missed out on the start of something huge. Well, today we're kind of like rewinding time, going way back to the very start of Linux, like before it was even Linux.
Yeah, it's wild when you think about it. I mean, we're talking about software, right? And now it's everywhere. Your phone, probably even the server, hosting this very deep dive. But it all started, well, humbly is an understatement.
Seriously, humbly doesn't even cut it. We're talking one single announcement. It looks ancient, really. From 1991, get this, the title. Free Minix-like kernel sources for 386-AT computers.
Oh,
And it gets better. It was available via, wait for it, FTP.
I can practically hear the dial-up tone.
Right. You could practically taste the 90s in the air.
Seriously, though, it really puts into perspective how much the tech world has, well, transformed. Back then, this whole free operating system kernel thing, it was radical. Anyone could mess with it, share it, unimaginable for most.
It really was. And the mastermind behind it, young Linus Torvalds, call himself a hacker, just throwing his creation out there, see what sticks.
I imagine the tech world was a very different place back then.
Oh, totally. What gets me is how casual it all seems. Like, he even mentions no Minix code was used. Minix, by the way, another operating system. Kind of a big deal in those days, at least with the academics.
Right, and that little detail, that's crucial. See, everyone loved Minix, the design, brilliant. But the licensing, oof, talk about a nightmare for developers. So Linus goes and creates something totally new, totally open. It's like he handed everyone the keys, not just to admire software, but to build their own kingdom.
And he did it all right there in that first announcement, invited the world to collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds obvious now, but back then, that was revolutionary.
I bet.
I'm looking forward to any comments you might have, he writes. That right there, that open source spirit, that shared ownership, that became Linux.
It's amazing to see that spark right from the very beginning, because Linux, it wasn't just different code, it was a different kind of community. This idea that, hey, great software, it's not a one-man show, it's a symphony.
And speaking of brilliant minds coming together, let's jump ahead a bit. Another turning point in the Linux saga. And this one, well, it almost never happened. This one's about Git. We found this interview from 2015 with Linus, and what he says about version control, well, you'll never guess. Oh, I'm hooked already. Knowing Linus and his obsession with efficiency, I'm betting he wasn't a fan of complexity.
You got that right. He actually calls source control management the least interesting thing in the computing world. The irony, right? This is the guy who changed how we build operating systems, and he found tracking code changes, wait for it, boring.
You know, there's a lesson in there somewhere. Sometimes the tools we end up depending on most are born out of necessity, not some grand passion. All right, well, tell me this sounds necessary. You're leading a project, massive, complex, the Linux kernel, code flying in from every corner of the globe, and the existing tools, either slow, clunky, or just don't jive with how your team operates. What do you do?
Well, if you're Linus Torvalds, you lock yourself away for 10 days and emerge with a brand new version control system, obviously.
10 days. That's all it took to create the first version of Git. It's practically a legend, like some coding marathon fueled by pure genius and enough caffeine to sink a ship. But here's the kicker. This tool, built out of frustration, ended up changing how we write software, period. So we've got Git, this like brand new version control system built in, what, 10 days?
Yeah.
You know, makes you wonder, what's the big deal?
See, the magic of Git, it wasn't just about speed. It was about changing the game completely. It was about decentralization.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that even mean? I'm picturing developers, like 100 of them, each with their own version of the code. How does that not become, well, a mess?
That's just it. That's the beauty. Before Git, everything was centralized. One central repository. Talk about a bottleneck, right? Need a change, permission slip. Please, want to merge code, get in line. It just blew that whole system wide open.
So everyone gets a copy. Everything. That's a bold move.
Bold and absolutely game-changing. Suddenly, every developer, they had the entire history of the project at their fingertips. Experiment, create a branch, make changes, no permission slips required.
And this is where it becomes like bigger than just code, right? Almost a philosophy.
100%. It's like a democratized coding. You create this culture built on trust, on collaboration, no fear of breaking things because, hey, you've got the whole timeline right there. And for a project like Linux, this massive global community, that was huge.
It makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah.
You're not all in one room. You're spread out, all these different minds, but they can all work at the same time. No waiting. Just constant building, iterating, amazing. But that only works if the system itself,
Hmm.
it can keep up, right? I mean, the Linux kernel, that's the heart of an operating system.
Precisely. Git's efficiency, that was critical. It was built from day one to handle these massive projects, thousands of contributors. It had to be fast, reliable, able to deal with this constant influx of changes, all going into the Linux kernel.
So it solved this problem, this very specific problem for Linux.
Mm.
But then it just exploded, right? Everyone's using it.
Exactly. Git became the tool. Countless projects and how we build software fundamentally changed. And it's a good reminder, right? Sometimes the best solutions, they come from addressing a specific need really well. Git, it was about empowering this community, letting them build something amazing. And, well, it changed how we code.
Makes you wonder what other boring problems are out there just waiting for their Git moment, you know? But before we get too philosophical, we got to address the elephant in the room here. What about the future of the Linux community itself?
Right, because every success story, especially in the tech world, it hits some bumps in the road. Linux is no exception.
We keep seeing these articles in the Register and from the Rust community even. And it's a little, well, concerning, this whole idea of it graying.
Yeah, that's a real concern. An aging developer base, it's something the open source community is wrestling with for sure.
It's more than just age, though, isn't it? Burnout.
Yeah.
That desire to build something new. Maintaining decades-old code, even if it's brilliant code, it's got to be, well.
A little repetitive, especially when you've got all these shiny new technologies popping up left and right. That urge to create, to innovate, it's a powerful force.
So you've got this potential brain drain, right? All this experience walking out the door, people looking for the next big thing. How do you keep the Linux world, interesting?
Well, step one is admitting there's a problem. And the community, to their credit, they're doing that. They're taking action.
Like, what kind of action are we talking?
So you've got programs like the Linux Kernel Mentorship Program. It's brilliant, really. Take these eager new developers, pair them up with the veterans, the ones who built the whole thing.
Ah, so it's like a passing of the torch.
Exactly. Can't let that knowledge just disappear, right? But it goes beyond just the code. Open source, it's about this shared passion that's got to be nurtured. It's not all about the kernel either. There's the LFX mentorship program, too. That's about cultivating future leaders across the whole open source landscape.
So fresh blood, fresh ideas.
Mm.
And speaking of fresh, can't ignore the big news, right? Rust.
Mm-hmm.
In the Linux kernel.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a seismic shift, even for those of us who, well, don't speak code.
It's a big deal. I mean, C, that's been the king for decades, the language of systems programming. But it's not perfect. Memory management, that's always been the Achilles heel.
So C, it's powerful, but maybe a little risky.
You can say that again. One wrong move, you've got bugs, security holes, headaches you wouldn't believe. Rust, though. Rust was designed with safety in mind, from the ground up. Makes it way harder to write code that'll blow up in your face.
Okay, so that's one thing, but here's the real kicker. I keep hearing Rust might actually be faster than C in some cases.
It's not some magic trick. It's just clever engineering. Rust gives you this amazing control over memory management, but you don't sacrifice performance.
But there's got to be hurdles, right? I mean, integrating a whole new language into something as complex as the Linux kernel, that can't be easy.
It's a massive undertaking for sure. And then there's the human element. Linus himself, he's not exactly known for holding back, shall we say, when it comes to his opinions.
Yeah, Linus definitely has opinions. So what's the verdict? Rust, good or bad?
You know, Linus has actually been pretty receptive to Rust. He sees the potential.
Yeah.
And he's been supportive of bringing it into the kernel, which, coming from him, speaks volumes.
It really does. It's like this balancing act, respecting the legacy, but still pushing forward. I mean, we're talking about a project that's older than some of the people listening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still evolving, still finding ways to be relevant.
That's the beauty of open source, I think, of
Mhm.
Linux especially. It's proof that collaboration works, that shared purpose, it can achieve amazing things. And as we wrap up our little deep dive here, it really gets you thinking.
It does.
Will this be enough? Will bringing in new talent, embracing new technology like Rust, will that keep Linux going for another 30 years? Who knows? But whatever happens, it's going to be fascinating to watch.
It really will be. So next time you boot up your computer, your phone, your smart, whatever, take a second. Think about Linux. This quiet little revolution. Still going strong after all these years, all thanks to a bunch of people who believed in open collaboration and, let's be honest, some pretty incredible coding. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.